Hi everyone, welcome to the parish. We are in our 6th week of a 7-week series from the Gospel of John. We've been looking at some statements Jesus made that began with the words, I am. I am the good shepherd, I am the light of the world, I am the bread of life. Last week, we talked about his statement, I am the vine and you are the branches. It was a call to his followers to live intentionally. He said, I remain in the Father and the Father remains in me. And so you remain in me. He was calling us to a level of intimacy that he shares with God the Father. He was calling us to connectivity with Christ and with our community. This week, we're going to be looking at an I am statement that I would say is pretty controversial. It might be one of the most controversial things that's recorded in the Gospels. It's been hotly contested. There's been a lot of debate over many centuries. I'll tell you the verse, and we're going to read it in context in a little bit, but to tell you what we're talking about, it's from John 14:6, where Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me. I asked some of my friends this week what they thought about that verse. I said, what do you like about this verse? What do you not like? Talk to me. And one of my friends said, I don't really have a problem with this verse. What I have a problem with is that I think it's been misinterpreted, and it's been used often by Christian people to justify exclusion. It's been used by Christian people to invalidate the experiences of others, to demean others, to talk about the spiritual experiences of others as though they are not significant and as though they are meaningless if they don't fit into this particular prescribed formula as laid out by a certain sect of Christianity. That's been my concern with this verse as well. And so I want to spend some time with you on that today. We need to take a look at what Jesus was saying here. What was the point he was making? Because we know that Jesus said the greatest commandments are to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love others as we love ourselves. And so if we are taking a verse and understanding it in a way that causes us to exclude, to demean, to invalidate, to talk down to other people, then we are not reading that verse correctly. So there are several things we're going to do in order to read this verse in the way that I think and that a lot of scholars think Jesus intended. It's going to be a little bit lengthy because we're going to spend a good amount of time sort of going through some study tools to look at that verse. And then we're going to talk about what is it that Jesus wanted his followers then to know. What does Jesus want his followers now to know? And what should we be doing? How should we be living according to what we learn in this passage and according to what we learn about Jesus himself and the example that he sets for us? So first, we're going to kind of go through that one verse and break it down a little bit, unpack it. Then we'll look at the passage and talk about the global picture. So let me first read the whole passage, because one of the things we need to do, if there's one verse that seems to be causing us to live in a way that's antithetical to the gospel of Christ, one of the things we need to do is read it in context and see what was being said, what was happening when this was recorded and when it occurred. So we're in John chapter 14. We're starting at verse 1, and I'm going to read the first 11 verses. Jesus said to his disciples, "Don't let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God and trust also in me. There is more than enough room in my Father's home. If this were not so, would I have told you that I am going to prepare a place for you? When everything is ready, I will come and get you so that you will always be with me where I am, and you know the way to where I am going." "No, we don't, Lord," Thomas said. "We have no idea where you are going, so how can we know the way?" Jesus told him, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you had really known me, you would know who my Father is. From now on, you do know him, and you have seen him." Philip said, "Lord, show us the Father, and we will be satisfied." Jesus replied, "Have I been with you all this time, Philip, and yet you still don't know who I am? Anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. So why are you asking me to show him to you? Don't you believe that I am in the Father and the Father is in me? The words I speak are not my own, but my Father who lives in me does his work through me. Just believe that I am in the Father and the Father is in me, or at least believe because of the work you have seen me do. So, one tool for dealing with a verse that seems to be antithetical to the gospel when we need to understand it more is to read it in context. Another tool is to ask questions about the setting and who authored it. So the setting in which this occurred was in the upper room. We talked last week about something Jesus gave to his disciples called the farewell discourse. It takes place in about 3 chapters in the Gospel of John. And it's all on what we would now call Maundy Thursday. They're in the upper room. Jesus has washed their feet. He's served them Passover meal where he says, this is my body broken for you. He says, Judas is going to betray me, and Judas leaves to go and do that work. Peter says, oh, I would never do that. And Jesus says, oh, really? Before the rooster crows tomorrow morning, you will have denied me 3 times. And it's right after that then that Jesus launches into this part where he says, don't let your hearts be troubled. He was comforting them. He was about to leave. They were about to have their world turned upside down. And what he was saying to them is that you guys know me. You spent time with me. You've seen God at work. God is with you. God is present with you. So hold fast and hold tight to that. Know that in this uncertain and shaky time, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Hold fast, hold tight to your faith, because what you saw here among us was real, and it continues whether I am here in the flesh or not. When John recorded this, he wrote it about 40 years later. He was exiled. He was writing letters to the churches, to early Christians. The Roman Empire was persecuting Christians at this point. Remember Nero, the Emperor Nero, and the horrible things he did to Christians, burning them alive and sending them into the Colosseum to be eaten by lions, tortured. They were being martyred daily. And John is in exile. And he's hearing these reports of what's happening. And he goes, you know what? I remember a time when our faith, my and my fellow disciples, I remember a time when our faith was sorely tested. When our world was turned upside down and we didn't know what to believe and we didn't know who to trust in. And I remember those words that Jesus said to us. And I really think the church today needs to hear those stories. I'm going to write them down. I want them to hear what Jesus had to say to people who were suffering, people who were shaken in their faith and in their beliefs. And so John wrote this, sharing this story with the church. Be reassured, believers. Be reassured in your faith. That which you have seen and experienced, seeing and knowing God at work in the world, God is still at work. God is the way, the truth, and the life. So hold fast and hold tight. This passage was reassurance. It wasn't exclusion. It wasn't, hey guys, you're the ones who have it all figured out. You're going to get the prize at the end of the day, and then we can kind of, just not worry about the people who didn't choose to do what we did. He's not saying that at all. Jesus wasn't saying that. That isn't why John wrote it down for them. It was meant as reassurance to followers of Christ, people who had seen glimpses of God at work. Hold fast and hold tight. So we've read this passage in context. We've talked about the setting. We've talked about who wrote it and the audience to which they were writing. Let's also talk a little bit about the language. This was originally written in Greek. And so I want to look at the part of that verse in John 14:6, where Jesus says, no one comes to the Father except through me. The word through is key, and we need to look at it a little bit. In Greek, the word is dia, and sometimes it is translated through. Sometimes it's translated why. There's a passage in Matthew where someone is asking the disciples, why is Jesus doing this? They asked, dia, is Jesus doing this? So why is one of the translations. We could say, no one comes to the Father except why? Me. Me being Jesus. Sometimes the word dia is translated for this reason. So no one comes to the Father except for this reason? Me. Meaning Jesus. It gives it a different spin, doesn't it? It's bad grammar. Those two sentences, nobody comes to the Father except why? Me. No one comes to the Father except for this reason? Me. It's bad grammar. So you can see why someone wanted to get rid of that clumsiness and use the word through instead. But it paints us a different picture. It shows us that God is the one who's acting. God is the one taking the initiative. God is the one drawing people to God's own self. No one comes to the Father except why? Because God has drawn them in. No one comes to the Father for any reason except because of what God has done first. And that, my friends, is grace. Prevenient grace specifically. Grace that goes before. Grace that makes a way. Grace that beckons believers closer. Beckons unbelievers to move in and investigate little glimpses that they've seen in the world of some goodness and some beauty. I want to share with you a quote from Rob Bell. He sums this up really, really well. And he talks about this passage where Jesus says, no one comes to the Father except through me. And Rob says, this is as wide and expansive a claim as a person can make. What Jesus doesn't say is how or when or in what manner the mechanism functions that gets people to God through him. He doesn't even state that those coming to the Father through him will even know that they are coming exclusively through him. He simply claims that whatever God is doing in the world to know and redeem and love and restore the world is happening through him. He is as exclusive as himself and as inclusive as containing every single particle in creation. God draws us in. And the beauty and the goodness and the redemption that we see in the world, whether we know it or not, is the work of God among us. So we've talked about the context, the setting, the author, the audience. We've talked about the language. There's one more thing I want to talk about, and then we'll dive into the disciples' reaction, how that mirrors reactions that we have today, and what to do about it. So I'm going to have to pause here, tune into the next video. It's coming right up, and we'll meet back here and dive into it.